I'm pretty excited for this. We've got two security titans who are going to come up and have a conversation. I am not one of the security titans, by the way. I'm the one that Dave usually just gets on a fishing test. Nonetheless, we're here to have a good conversation with the two of them. They're going to see this a little bit differently, I think, than most of us would look at the market today, how we look at cybersecurity, the way that we're managing in our business and across our customers. So with that, what I'd like to do is please ask that Chris Krebs and Dave MacKinnon join me on stage, please. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
No, I think this is going to be a good discussion. Let's start off first, maybe, Chris, if you could just give a little bit about yourself, an introduction, and I don't think that you really need one, but nonetheless, we'll let you do one for the room.
Well, I'm kind of on that every 2 years, changing up roles. But so I was first director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the Department of Homeland Security. And that's CISA. CISA is the nation's cyber defense. It should be one of your go-to resources for easy to implement. I say easy, but I kind of use air quotes around that. Implement guidance for cybersecurity. They've got actually a lot of MSP related guidance that frankly only started coming out in the last couple of years. I think it took a while for the federal government to understand the MSP market. Now I am the Chief Intelligence and Public Policy Officer with SentinelOne.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us here, Chris. Mr. MacKinnon, also known as DMAC, if you would like to give your intro, please.
I can't really follow that.
I know.
So yeah, Dave MacKinnon. I've been with Enable for the last 3 years. Obviously, run the security team for us. Oftentimes refer to myself as the intern, so that's me.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's jump right into it and really start to have some of that discussion. When we look at, and Chris, we'll start with you, like what should MSPs today be worried about? Because I think a lot has evolved over the last few years for them. Where would you see that they should have some of that focus of worry?
Yeah, so I mentioned that the US government kind of missed the importance for a long, long time of MSPs and where they fit into the IT ecosystem and into industry. For the longest time, it had been like, hey, let's just go knock on the front door of the big banks, the defense industrial base, the telcos, transportation. And it took a while to get that full understanding and appreciation that once you step out of the Fortune 100s or so, there's this massive ecosystem supporting the US economy. That doesn't quite have those resources, that doesn't have the personnel stacked up against it, and they do rely on MSPs. And I think once the current ransomware epidemic really took off in 2018, and it brought the fact that MSPs play this pivotal role, and they're big targets, I think they started to have to kind of look at it a little bit differently. And so that's, like I mentioned, I think guidance really started picking up out of government around 2000, particularly with COVID and how so many organizations had to shift to remote work. But look, I mean, a lot of the MSP security practices are going to be the same as just any other organization. Really lock down credentials, whether it's getting compromised through phishing or brute force or password sprays. But it's also vulnerable edge devices. I mean, we've seen over the last couple of years that whether it's the Russians, the Chinese, or cyber criminals, they're really not innovating through really fancy malware. Those kind of days are for now a little bit in the past, and it's now they're just popping vulnerable edge devices and they're hopping into networks and then moving laterally. So it's just basic quality vulnerability management. And those, so it's the basics that everybody else talks about. But I would just really stress that, as I mentioned at the beginning, where the government's been focused on the big organizations, they've been focused on the really higher end advanced persistent threats. You guys are sitting right there in the meaty middle that ransomware actors have figured out. And, downtime is probably one of your KPIs. I assume it is, at least. The bad guys get that. They understand that if they bring you down, you're going to do everything possible to get back up just because of the ecosystem and the network of customers that you have to continue to support. And they play that against you. So if you look at ransomware trends or at least just broader cybersecurity or cyber attack trends for 2023, it was like 35, at least according to Sentinel Labs, like 35-36% of targets was manufacturing. Same rationale applies. Downtime, downtime, downtime. Every pressure that they feel on downtime, it's get it back up. So you're seeing a lot of payments on ransomware. Same thing goes here. You can't afford downtime. You pay the bad guys off as much as possible.
Yeah, makes sense. Dave, you talk to obviously a lot of our partners on a regular basis. Like, what's your message around this to them?
Well, I mean, the reality is, like Chris said, like the tools are commodity now. So what you're being attacked with years ago, I had a conversation yesterday about attribution. Like attribution is damn near impossible when it comes to most of these tools because of what it is. Some of the challenges I think MSPs specifically have are adoption of tools. I mean, I know I've had that conversation a few times since I've been here. And effectively building, I refer to it as resiliency. Like effectively security is risk mitigation. So figuring out what does that look like for that customer, how do you come up with that stack to ensure that if something happens, you can get back in a rapid manner and understand you're gonna be that first call. You all know it, like every MSP is that first call when their customer gets hit. Anybody who was watching the news, I think it was just 2 or 3 weeks ago out in California, yep. A lawsuit was lodged against an MSP whose customer was ransomed, and they sued the backup vendor and they sued the MSP. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, I know everybody has contracts, and you understand your limits of liability, but how that plays out in the court of law will also be interesting. So all that's very interesting. And then obviously regulation. I mean, Chris had talked about what CISA is doing. JCDC specifically has an MSP or RMM specific working group that we're actually a part of. And that is something where I think you're just going to see the ecosystem get stronger and better. And effectively what you want is, and it's not just enable, we all get better. Like the vendors get better, the MSPs get better, and their customers are safer. Like if that's what we walk out of for a better, more secure landscape, that's a huge benefit coming out of that group.
Yeah.
So building on that, one thing I didn't mention is I think increasingly going forward, transparency is going to be absolutely critical. So the conversations you have with your customers, particularly about risk management, and who owns what aspect of the risk management strategy or framework is going to be important, and don't kind of like hide behind the contract or pretend it's not there. You have to have those, because that conversation is going to happen when they have an incident, and they're going to call you and say like, hey, I'm having this problem, and you could say, hey, it was in the contract, that's your problem, not mine. Yeah. Like that's just not a great conversation to have. So really having that transparent conversation up front. And I think they get you to a much better spot.
Yeah, and also having plans. I mean, so when it happens internally, like we're doing a tabletop tomorrow, so anybody who wants to join the technical track, Lewis pulled this together, like knowing what you're going to do when something happens and not doing it for the first time when you get that phone call is absolutely critical. So again, it's really that resiliency planning is a part of it.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And if you think, and Chris, you touched a little bit on it, but the evolution of this movement of, security to cybersecurity and, whatever word it is that, we may want to use out there today, how has that really changed over the last 3 to 4 years, do you think?
It's evolved in a way that I think it's natural given the threat environment, given particularly ransomware. So just like to start, when you hear, I don't care who you see on TV talking about it, whether it's me or someone else, and all anyone ever wants to talk about is like, what's Russia doing? What's China doing? Volt Typhoon, China this, China that. Those are very important threats for everyone to keep in mind. Mm-hmm. But the thing that you should be thinking about first thing in the morning when you get out of bed, and the last thing you think about before you go to bed, is ransomware. That is the threat actor that doesn't care who you are or what you are, because they're not trying to steal necessarily your sensitive data. They're trying to lock you up, and they're trying to take stuff from you that they know you want to get back. And so the conversation has changed over the last couple of years away from, in ransomware specifically, about where it's just a pure lockup. Because organizations have learned, they've gotten better because they've had at least one. They're like, I don't ever want to do that again. So they bring in a recovery solution. And there are a bunch of different companies that do that now. That's actually been a really impressive area of innovation, I think, in cybersecurity. Companies like Cohesity and Rubrik and others. Just good quality ransomware focused recovery solutions. But now it's shifting to data extortion. So they're going to lock you up and they're going to exfil data. And so while we're seeing volume, on the volume side, I think fewer payments, even though the payments are getting larger in dollar-wise on the extortion, or rather on the encryption side, we're seeing more and more on the extortion side. And just kind of one last anecdote here. I was talking to somebody 2 weeks ago out in San Diego at the Financial Services ISAC Summit, where they, based on their network, they had heard of six $100 million plus ransom payments in the last 6 months.
Wow.
And those are just the ones that we're hearing about, and there are likely others. So this ransomware problem is not going away. The U.S. government and allies cannot stop it. It's just the install base remains, easy pickings, and then we've got a pretty sporty set of adversaries that get free rein coming out of Russia.
Yeah. DMAC, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think ransomware is definitely and the scope has changed to where everybody's in play, and that's just the reality. I'm kind of interested, especially now, that transparency piece. Like we're publicly traded, so we have a mandatory filing in the event of a material event. Those $100 million payments may or may not be material. I mean, it depends upon how much you're bringing in every year, but I think that is part of, that transparency is critical, reporting this out if it happens to you and making sure you're engaging law enforcement. I will say, even when I've worked with law enforcement, that has changed significantly over the last few years too. They're much, I don't want to say negative, I don't want to say better to work with, but they are much more engaging. The information is more bidirectional now. It didn't used to be. They're being far more proactive in getting information out there, whether it be the Secret Service or the FBI or other teams. So it's one of those things I definitely agree. We've seen governments more involved. Law enforcement is more involved. They do want to protect small to medium-sized businesses. But the challenge is we now have these large-scale problems that these smaller companies have to figure out how do you manage and maintain against that and build a stack that protects them.
It kind of relatedly, this conversation 3 or 4 years ago was like, oh, what can you do? Don't pay, we can't ban it. But now more and more we're seeing these conversations in kind of the halls of power in DC and in Europe and elsewhere. I say no, we need to figure out how to ban payments. It's just gonna be a bloodbath though, if they do roll in and ban, because many of your customers are probably gonna be in an existential position if they get encrypted and they don't have quality recoveries.
Yeah.
And so what are they going to do? And it's a really difficult conversation, but if we keep feeding the bad guys, they're going to keep coming back for more.
Yeah, part of the challenge is also fear. You're scared of, I have to report this, what state's attorney general is going to be contacting me based upon the data that's exposed, then I got to pay for all these additional, I don't want to say breach reporting regulations need to change, but figuring out a way to effectively handle that is going to be another change too. Because when you buy it back, you officially haven't lost that data, so you don't have a reporting requirement, and it's a sad reality. But sometimes that fear is what prevents people from.
And on the reporting front, the CISA incident reporting requirement is at least the notice for proposed rulemaking is going to go live pretty soon. So this is going to become a real deal thing where it's not just the SEC and you're like, not publicly traded, don't have to worry about it. But it's going to touch a much larger scope of growth. But last point, I know.
No, you're all good. No, you're all.
That's why we're here.
I'm learning while I'm up here.
But another way the conversation's changed in the last couple years is we are seeing, I think, more and more companies that are willing to talk to the FBI or CISA. They're willing to, and there are a couple of very good reasons for it, but just on the ransomware piece alone, I know I'm hitting this hard, but Colonial Pipeline's a great example. Colonial Pipeline worked with the FBI, made the payment, but before making the payment, they actually shared the information with the FBI, including on the wallet, the Bitcoin wallet. And the FBI was able to trace it, and they were able to pull it back. Now, I'm not saying that's a good public policy move, because that's a lot of calories to go get some money back that probably shouldn't have left anyway. But it just shows that there is value of working with the government. They can help you out here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like one thing that we also I've talked to a lot of people here, I think looking to your end customers, they're more willing to make that investment today now too, because they're more educated about that threat landscape, right, than what we probably saw 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, and you're also, I mean, odds are everyone's had at least one event. And so you can't kind of play the waiting game of, it'll never happen, and when it does, we'll accelerate. I think that's just the nature, A, of humans, but B, of the business environment. It's like, I'm not going to make that investment until I absolutely have to, and then once you have, and we see that. You know, once a company makes or has an event, the greatest opportunity for increase of spend is immediately after. When you have the big event, boom, there comes the spend, or you get a new CISO or leader in, that's the other.
Never waste a good emergency.
Yeah.
Exactly. Truth. Exactly. Dave, we'll go to you on this one first. So what is your unpopular opinion? Or ins? I know you have a few, so.
I have lots of unpopular opinions. For starters, I hate YouTube with my kids because I watch stupid video games, other people playing them.
I don't understand that.
I don't either. It drives me nuts. Maybe it's a very popular opinion in this room. But no, the part I worry in terms of unpopular is that I don't think we should pay the bad guys. I do think we cannot hide this. And I think a lot of people want to do that. I'm not saying that's in this room, but I do 100% believe that we need to go fix this problem and we need to work together. And that means all of us in this room, you're working with your customers and figuring out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And maybe that's not an unpopular opinion, but
no, I think the unpopular opinion is, at least in the policy circles, is we have to ban ransomware payments. And it's going to be really hard. It's going to hurt a lot of people. But that's not reason enough to say we're not going to do it. And that there has been virtually no maturation of that conversation in 2 years, because a decision was made 2+ years ago that said we can't do it. It's going to be too hard. It's like, okay, we're going to go talk about Gen AI or something then in the meantime. And so it's not a fully fledged conversation. We've got to start building a framework. And I'm thinking more along the lines of okay, since there are solutions for encryption and specifically recovery capabilities, let's allow payments there. Okay, because you should have made the investment anyway. So you're on the hook for paying to get it unlocked. Maybe you'll deal with it next time. It's the extortion. And the reason for paying extortion tends to be a regulatory concern or a reputational concern. It's like, see, that's not a technical problem. That is more of a business environment problem. We can take some interventions there. So I'm thinking more, we look at banning payments on for the extortion side. Now, how you actually do that in practice and say what was their kind of mens rea, what was their mentality when they made the payment? It was like, we're doing it for this reason. That's going to be really hard. But lawyers get creative, and so do prosecutors. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's also part of the challenge with that. Doing the payment oftentimes is how quickly you can get that business back. When you take what happened last summer out in Vegas, where they were completely down.
Down hard.
And that was not hey, we're going to be up in an hour. But that's resiliency. You've come up with that plan, saying, okay, this is what we need to come back in this order. But they felt that pain.
Change healthcare, right?
Yeah.
That was several weeks, and you had medical practices that were on the cusp because they couldn't get payments in. So you see it every day, and it makes a lot of sense. All right, so my unpopular opinion is I hate phishing tests. I hate them.
And I was just talking about them in back.
We were actually.
I hate them. I kind of start from a position of that if you put your organization into the position where a single user clicking something gives them the God's eye within the enterprise, your strategy's wrong. Now, yes, it's useful to train people on what, don't click on that or don't open that. But I'm telling you right now, all the old tricks of syntax, spelling, different little tricks of the trade we've used for detecting whether an email, just as humans, is good or bad. Those things, all those tricks are going to be gone soon, because we're seeing ransomware actors right now use ChatGPT and other tools to write the better mousetrap phishing lure. I've seen it in multiple incidents, they are indistinguishable from something that a Microsoft or a Facebook or somebody else would have sent it to you. They are perfect. Now, once you get into one-to-one chats with them to negotiate payments, then it's like, oh, okay, these guys are, Eastern European Russian. They don't do the English so well. But I'm telling you, that is the primary use of Gen AI right now, is for phishing, social engineering, research, and automation of basic functions. That's it. No giant malware, development or anything like that. It's all to trick you people.
Yeah.
That's it.
Dave, any thoughts on that?
No, I don't disagree. I mean, if you look at like BEC scams and how they've really evolved over the last few years and how perfect these threat actors are when they inject into that conversation to reroute payments and things like that, 100% agree. For us, it's more of the part I worry about, and part of the reason we do phishing testing is because one, and our CIO isn't here so I can say this, because when he clicked on it, then I got to buy him a mug that says, I got phished, and all I got is this stupid mug. I totally did that. But part of it is that heightened sense of awareness.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge we have, like especially with Enable, is we're a global company.
Yeah.
So like we can't do a W-2 phishing email to our folks in the UK. They're gonna be like,
Right.
yeah, okay,
W2.
get rid of this. So I do think it does help kind of get the basics. The part I worry about more is how do people start to spot with like cred harvesting and things like that, especially now that everybody's kind of, it's cloud first, everything's SaaS. That identity is so very, very valuable. And if you don't have the right controls with MFA or conditional access and all the other things, like that opens up, that it is a pinhole, but it can be expanded from there. So Chris, I agree. It's like, it's not that one thing, but it's now with everything being in the cloud, how many other things can they get to?
And to be clear here, there was a point in time where phishing tests were universally applicable. I think increasingly now, though, particularly for larger resourced organizations, they're less relevant because the controls that you can deploy to prevent any lateral movement or account takeovers. I think very likely for your customers, they're relevant. Now, once they start moving into, MFA, hard token MFA in particular, it does become less of a, it becomes the W-2 equivalent here. It's like, well, I can't enter, I don't have a password. Why are you asking for a password? I don't have one.
Yeah.
So that's I think the more we see the ecosystem go that way, then yes, phishing tests will be very much a relic of the past.
Yes, which why all those companies have been acquired.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Fair point. So DMAC, we'll stay with you. So as you look through your crystal ball and you kind of think about this, where do you see this going in the next 1 to 2 years, or where should that focus be, right, from MSPs?
So I think the focus is going to be, again, like we talk about the work that's happening with JCDC. Like how do we come up with a more secure not that everybody here isn't working on security, and I know folks are, and that's awesome, but how do we as a community do better? I think some of that is vendor transparency, ourselves included. Are we gonna start to see where folks are dropping S-bombs or other pieces, again, I think the third-party vendor risk is true risk. And you should hold, us included, folks accountable to make sure that we're not full of shit. So I think that will continue. We're going to see regulation come out. We're already seeing it in certain states, depending upon who you're working with for state and local government, and that will continue to evolve. And I'm really kind of curious to see what happens with the cyber insurance. Cyber insurance is not a fallback, but a lot of folks are still using it as that's the backstop for when you have an event. And they're catching on to it. I mean, they've raised the rates, but they're going to get to the point where they figure out how they can just.
But coverages, policy coverages are narrowing while premiums are going up, and it's also increasingly difficult to even complete the process because the questionnaires are becoming
so long.
They're tripling every year. And so and I've talked to a couple of the big ones, and I said, well, why don't you use some EDR equivalent or XDR equivalent, deploy it real time? It's almost like the OBD2. Sensors that auto insurance providers use. That's, I think, going to be the future of insurance. So it's real-time telemetry collection. But then you have to think about, well, who's triaging alerts? Yeah. Because they're going to be firing all the time. Maybe Gen AI can help there. But insurance is, we could be, at least as we kind of think of cyber insurance, in the waning days of that industry.
Yeah, I would agree.
There will be products that are really narrowly targeted, but the actuarial tables don't work. It's not like a hurricane season. It's everybody everywhere. They shift target or tactics. They they move along.
So and I'm going to ask this in a different way, maybe a little bit, and just as you were both discussing it, we talk about regulation, right? We're doing certain things in the U.S., Canada's doing theirs, Europe's doing theirs, UK's doing theirs. When do we end up with a global framework at some point? Do you?
Oh, absolutely not.
No.
No way in hell. No, it's not happening. So I deal with this a lot in DC and Brussels and elsewhere, of this kind of regulatory harmonization. And it's not going to work, because sovereignty over just general policy issues will always override what we think is really important in cyber. But I got to tell you, like, it's a fourth, fifth, sixth tier consideration in national capitals.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And in the meantime, you have emerging technologies that bubble up that, we're still focused on this thing. Meanwhile, boom, they're out the gate on regulations in Europe on Gen AI. So the AI Act comes into force, and it's passed and it goes into force in the fall. I mean, it is a risk-based regulation, but there are very clear things you can and cannot do. The US approach to regulating or overseeing generative AI is like transparency. You clear a threshold, the equivalent of 100 million billion operations, which, by the way, is 4 times as great as what ChatGPT 4 at least is doing right now. Then all you have to do is you have to tell the government that you have that capability and the results of your red teaming. That's it. So I don't ever see the regulatory approaches in Brussels and DC shifting.
Yep, makes sense. So we have a few minutes left here. I'll ask each of you, Chris, we'll start with you. What would be your piece of advice to everybody sitting in this room as they go forward with their secure strategy and their cyber resiliency? What should they really be thinking about as the next thing in their organization to protect themselves? But then that would be a pass-through to the end customer.
Yeah, I was involved in a couple of the big responses in 2020 and 2021. So just to see where the MSP market has come since those days, just a few years ago, is pretty remarkable, where security is kind of at the forefront. What frustrated me then was when the conversation, whenever cybersecurity came up in the conversation, everybody's like, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. It's just going to sound like cost to the customers, and they're not going to want to deal with it. They'll go somewhere else. They're very, very price sensitive. I think we have been desensitized enough, but almost in a good way, where we accept cybersecurity events happen. We have to figure out what that really means to us. And so the takeaway, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, is this shift towards resilience. It's happening in a big way in financial services, but really be thinking about, like, hey, I am going to get hit, and I'm going to get hit hard. How do I make sure that a bad day doesn't turn into a worse day? So make sure you've got those solutions, again, the recovery solutions that pop up. Make sure you've got the right pathway in the conversations with your provider.
Yeah.
So, or that your customer can talk to you, because again, you're going to be the first call. And that you have, again, that clear understanding of who's responsible for what, and that you have a next step of, hey, what's your IR plan say in terms of who you have coming in and helping to clean up the mess. And this is another area of grave concern I have, is that the incident response market is changing at the same time. So you've got the bigs that do the big events, but you start going down market and digital forensics and incident response, and it's really getting commoditized. It's much smaller players that are they going to be there when you need it? And what if another company in wherever you're located has an issue at the same time? Are there personnel available?
Yeah, makes sense. Dave, your thoughts on that with a minute and a bit left?
Minute and a bit, all right, I'll talk quick. No, so I mean, like historically, and it's the same, I don't know if John's in here, but it's the same way I get money from John, talk about risk, business risk. How do you keep your business operating? How do you come up with that plan to protect the business? What are the most important parts of that business? I had a conversation with a customer a few months ago, and they specifically do dental offices. I said, cool. I said, well, what makes them the most money? Is it the x-ray machine? Is it like just having those patient records? How long can they afford not to have that up and operational if they lost that? And like that type of risk assessment against your customer's business, which you understand, helps them understand how to build resiliency into it to be successful. So that needs to be, I agree with Chris, like security is not a bad word anymore. People do throw money at it, but oftentimes the why is the important piece.
Yeah.
Like we're not just reaching in our pockets going, here, like Don doesn't like, here Dave, here's $1 million because you just asked for it. Here's the risk we're trying to address, and this is how we're trying to protect the business. And having that conversation will drive the investment from your customer because they're going to understand the value that you're adding as an MSP.
Yeah.
It's a great point because it has shifted over the last couple of years from this incident response. Like you've got to respond to the incident. You got to get things contained and back up and running. But then you're like, well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to get things back up and running? To your point, you're not going to get everything up and running at the same time. So you've got to work through your recovery time objectives and what are the things that are most important. That thing can wait, but I need that thing up. So making those hard decisions internally, make sure you've got internal sign-off too. Everybody's on the same page. It's like, no, I want that, I want that. Build that internal
I want it all and I want it now.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, like these are this is how we get more mature in industry. So there are silver linings all over the place. It's still a nasty threat landscape, and I will just again close it out. It's not going to get better anytime soon. Every country on the face of this earth is developing offensive cyber capabilities. Every single country. It's easier than ever for criminals to get access to these tools. It is being commoditized, to Dave's point. You are on the playing field if you do anything on the internet. Don't think you're special and they're not going to come for you. They will. Be ready. Assume they're going to be successful. Make sure you have that recovery plan in place.
Yeah, it's a great piece of advice. Well, I really want to thank both of you. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. A lot of really good insight. I learned you don't just get $1 million from John if you ask. No. So that's good to know. But really, thank you both for the insight and for your guidance here. And I hope everybody here found it as useful as well too. So thanks, folks. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.